The White Place. The artist, Georgia O'Keeffe, was filmed in New Mexico near the end of her life.
Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you climb if you were here? I walked all along the top. I've worked out here in the wind when the wind blew so that if I got off my chair it would blow away. I don't know how I kept my picture on the easel. Well, of course it was hot. And sometimes the Indians would be, there's a bunch of trees down there, the Indians would be under the trees. And there wasn't any place for me to be in the shade but under the car. I thought someone could tell me how to paint a landscape. But I never found that person. I had to just settle down and try. I thought someone could tell me how, but I found nobody could. They could tell you how they painted their landscape, but they couldn't tell me to paint mine.
In 1929, on the brink of a depression, Georgia O'Keeffe, America's first great modernist painter, was heading west. Much of the work for which she is best known lay ahead. In the bright light of the American desert, she forged an independent life and found the solitude she needed for her stunning new art. Her obsessive sexual relationship with her older lover, the photographer Alfred Stieglitz, scandalized the public. It fenced her in but fed her art. Her flower forms were seen as a shocking and vibrant expression of femininity.
It's as if my mind creates shapes that I don't know about. I can't say it any other way. I can see shapes.
Her work is often abstract, but always emotional and deeply human. It has defined the century she lived through. Now, 30 years after her death, 100 years after her first show in New York, Tate Modern is holding a major retrospective of Georgia O'Keeffe, perhaps the most inspiring woman artist ever. Georgia O'Keeffe was born here in 1887. This was pioneer country, the American Midwest. People came here from all over. Her family was Irish and Hungarian.
She doesn't talk much about Wisconsin. It's open, rolling landscape, and the soil is black. She grew up under a big sky.
It was something she'd be looking for all her life.
Mother would say Georgia was the boss.
She was the oldest of the 5 sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So she took advantage of her seniority, I think.
Georgia talks about her mother always reading to her. And her mother had a lovely voice. She would go off more by herself, was happier by herself. But she would play with this doll family under a tree by herself, not with the rest of these children. Very happy by herself.
I had it in my head when I was, well, I couldn't have been 12, that I wanted to be a painter. I was going to be a painter. I remember talking with a little girl, and I even remember her name, Lena Buchholz. And I said, Lena, what are you going to do when you grow up? Well, she didn't know. Well, I said, I'm going to be a painter. And I remember as we talked, walking over to the window and looking out and seeing the children around the schoolyard.
She could have been one of the children in this 19th century painting. It was a tradition she was going to blow out of the water. When she was 19, Georgia got a place at art college in New York. Very unusual for a farm girl from Wisconsin. Something happened here that stuck with her for life.
Eugene Spiker was one of the older students at the League. He often stopped me and wanted me to pose for him, but I wanted to work myself. "It doesn't matter what you do," he said. "I'm going to be a great painter. You'll probably end up teaching painting in some girls' school."
So Spiker gets to paint her, and there it is.
And of course the irony is that she goes on to have an amazing career. Very few people have the same knowledge of Eugene Spiker.
I walked up Riverside Drive one clear night with 3 other students. We sat down. I studied the outlines of the trees carefully, the unevenness of the edges, the mass of the trees, dark, solid, very alive. I tried to paint it. A student told me that my trees should be painted with spots of red and blue and green like the Impressionists. I said I hadn't seen anything like that in my trees, and he took my painting to show me. He painted on my trees the very part that I thought was so good. I worked on it again. I couldn't get it to be like the beautiful night that I had seen. But I kept it for years. It represented an effort towards something that had meaning to me, much more than the work at school.
You wouldn't think, oh, this is a Georgia O'Keeffe. This looks very much like the type of work that William Merritt Chase was creating at the beginning of the 20th century. This is a still life that he had set up in the class for the students.
And this is one of Chase's pictures.
Absolutely.
She's been influenced by Chase, really.
Yeah, she's highly influenced by what Chase is doing. As you are when you're a student, you're learning skills of painting, different methods of painting. Yeah, she's looking to Chase as a model for how to paint.
Who wants to spend their life painting rabbits in copper bowls?
She won a prize for her rabbit, a visit to Lake George, 200 miles north of New York City, to an artist's retreat there.
I went to a summer school for scholarship students. We had a sailboat with a red sail. The daisies were blooming. The mountains were blue beyond the lake. But it just didn't seem to be anything I wanted to paint. One night I stood a moment looking out across the marshes, then the woods with a few birch trees shining white on beyond. It all looked just like I felt. Wet and gloomy, very gloomy. So I painted it. My memory of it is that it was my best painting that summer. It was something I had to say.
I was taught to paint like other people, and I knew that I'd never paint as well as the person that I was taught to paint like. There was no reason why I should attempt to do it any better. I hadn't been taught any way of my own.
Discouraged, she worked as a commercial illustrator for a while and even resolved to give up painting. But ironically, it was the teaching to which Spiker thought she was doomed that was to save her.
I was offered this job in Texas, and I knew no more about teaching in the public schools than I do about going to the moon.
The drawing work will be under the supervision of Miss Georgia O'Keeffe, who has the highest degree known to her profession. The children in Amarillo will have the best talent that can be secured.
It was land like the ocean all the way round. Hardly anybody liked it, but I loved it. The wind blew too hard and the dust flew, and we had heavy dust storms, and I've come in many times when I wouldn't have known myself, except I could tell the shape of my clothes. I'd be the color of the road.
One of her students remembered how oddly she dressed for the time. She dressed like a man, suits and oxfords that were square-toed, and a man's type felt hat.
We would drive away from the town at night. You could drive right out into space. You didn't have to drive on the road. And when the sunset was gone, you turned around and went back and were lighted back by the light of the town. And sometimes the town would be out of sight, and then you'd see it again. It was that level.
As we learn from her many wonderfully frank letters, she was fired up by the open landscape and by falling in love with a young man called Arthur. She made the first move.
Games don't interest me like they do most women. I want to write to you, so I will.
Boldly, they go on a 4-day hiking trip together. She writes to her friend, Anita Politzer.
I feel stunned. I don't seem to be able to collect my wits. The world looks all new to me.
Now she knew what she wanted to say.
I put up a lot of pictures that I'd done during the year, and I could say, well, I painted that to please so-and-so, and I painted that to please so-and-so. Go around the room, there wasn't anything to please myself, and I thought that was pretty dull. So I put it all away and started over again. And I decided I was going to begin to make drawings. I thought, well, I have a few things in my head that I never thought of putting down, that nobody else taught me. And I was going to begin with charcoal, and I wasn't going to use any color until I couldn't do what I wanted to do with charcoal or black paint, and went on from there.
To Anita, she writes,
Did you ever have something to say and feel as if the whole side of the wall wouldn't be big enough to say it on, and then sit down on the floor and try to get it onto a sheet of charcoal paper? I've been crawling round on the floor till I have cramps in my feet.
To Arthur, she writes,
I have said something to you in charcoal.
She starts doing the work that reveals Georgia O'Keeffe, one of the greatest artists we have. And she does abstractions that draw on her own emotional life. They draw on the natural world. So she does these beautiful biomorphic forms, unfurling ferns, fronds, rushing waters, rock shapes. But she makes them abstract. She's saying, this is not the world you know, but this is the world you feel you know.